Okay, hello everyone. I think my voice is clear to you. Hello everyone. Good morning. Rather, good afternoon. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Okay, good morning, everyone. I think it is time to start, or for the green light, or your coordinator can tell me whenever to start with it. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Advocate Avneet Singh Billing. I am practicing at District Court Patiala. So today, the topic which I'll be speaking with you is the Negotiable Instruments Act 1881. The basic form which we know about is the day-to-day economic activity which we come across in our day-to-day life, like what you say is normal check bounce cases which we relate with it. So let me start with a brief history of the act. This act that was passed in 1881. So what are the basic fundamentals or the basic objects and the purpose of this act? This act, first of all, codifies the law dealing with our daily transactions, which our small traders or businessmen or multinational companies have or follow each other by following the procedures laid down by the law in India. First of all, let me tell you about the negotiable instruments are the objects and purpose of the act. The negotiable instruments are, in fact, the instruments of credit being convertible on account of the legality of being negotiated and thus easily passable from one hand to another. The source of Indian law, the main object of the act is to legalize the system by which instruments contemplated by it could pass from hand to hand by negotiation like any other goods. The purpose of this act was to present an orderly and authoritative statement of the leading rules of the law relating to negotiable instruments. The act intends to legalize the system under which claims upon mercantile instruments could be equated with ordinary goods passing from hand to hand. To achieve this objective of the act, the legislature in its wisdom thought it proper to make provision in the act of conferring for such privileges to the act for conferring such privilege to the mercantile instruments contemplated under it and provide special procedure in case the obligation under the instrument was not discharged. So basically, this is a technical take on it. What I can tell you in simple legal or practical terms, it that any transaction between two traders, which governs by the transaction of money exchange or the security of it. Like in the earlier times, we used to trade, or the people used to trade by barter system. Like food, grains could be exchanged from with grains, or some mercantile like cloth. If a person used to had to go to buy a piece of cloth from a merchant, in earlier times, a poor person used to give him a quantity of grains. Like with the passage of time, it slowly and gradually started with the exchange of money. The money which was a legal tender made by the British government during that period. But after independence and in the present circumstances, which we are following right now, what we see is all the transactions are through banking system. The banks which tell us, or the guidelines which RBI bring from time to time are followed by us. The object of Negotiable Instrument Act is to legalize the transactions which are followed by all the trading community or the businesses as general. Now, if a trader trades with another person, like a wholesaler sells his commodity, his goods to a merchant from a distant land or district, other district area, what does he have for a security? Like in day-to-day running costs are involved in the business. Most of the work is done on credit. Like we are aware of a number of things like the credit which is exchanged between the parties in good faith. If a merchant has to deliver him goods, he takes a security from the trader by way of some empty checks, which we say are given in security. When the goods are exchanged, the person will give him money. After he sells that goods, he will get that check back. In this way, this system has been running in India for the past many decades. What do I see in this is that in our day-to-day running life, how these checks are used, or they have become part of our economic system. What I see in this is that the chances, cases of forgery, sometimes we come across that complete a trader or a merchant has a safeguard against it. It is through this Negotiable Instruments Act, which a person can safeguard his hard-earned money, or the code which helps him protect him from this loss. So starting with this, what a remedy does a trader has or a businessman has against check bounce or the bouncing of the check? My small take on this is that, first of all, as you must have read from this Negotiable Instruments Act, that the procedure that has to be followed. It is a criminal law, criminal act, but it is not a totally by and large a criminal procedure. It is a summary trial procedure followed in this act. What I want to put up with it is that the procedure followed is simple, but if a trader has a right to be out of it, if he's suffering some problem or he's not able to pay the money, even after the process has been initiated. Like in some criminal cases, that cases are compoundable at the instance of the court or through the complainant only. But if the accused person shows his willingness to uh, pay the amount after he receives the notice, he can get out of this trouble. It is only after he refuses or fails to acknowledge the debt that is legally enforceable upon him, then a criminal proceeding can start against him. This is both, you can say, a civil as well as a criminal opportunities which are given to the complainant, which he can use. Like if a check is bounced on presentation to a banker and a memo is given, generally it is a memo which says that amounts, insufficient funds or account has been withdrawn or stopped by the accused person. Only is to send him a legal notice, that too in a time bound manner. See, the process being followed in this act is totally time bound. If a trader misses even a single day, which is fatal to his transaction. See, if a check is bounced, a legal notice has to be sent in 1 month period from the date of memo. He gets a memo from a bank. So if a date is passed, then it becomes difficult for him to take the credit or take the help of negotiable instrument. And the only other option that he's left is with a civil procedure, that is suit for recovery, which is very cumbersome and a lengthy procedure, though he will the conduct of the accused person. So I have been given a number of queries beforehand, which is to be answered or by me. I'll start with the answers in some way, slowly, step by step. Like I've been asked how to summon accused wherein he left the registered office and is underground. See, the act provides us section 144, which is the mode of service to the accused person. That is after a complaint has been filed with the magistrate, and in the normal course, he or she sends the person registered notice by way of DAC, which is registered post under section 144, which is codified in this act. But what is the remedy for a person who has left this place, who's acting smart, like he has left his place of business or has locked his house and goes underground? Then what is the remedy available for the person to follow his course? The courts provide for this also. The what can the complainant do in this regard? The complainant can move an application to the court to summoning the accused person through substituted service, that is by way of publication or munadi, which we call in our terminologies, which we use in our courts. And this munadi can be effected by way of publications in the newspaper by paying the fees of the newspapers, even after the date which is given to the accused person to come and attend the court on such and such given date. If he fails to do that also, then section 82 of the IPC can be invoked. That is proclamation of a proclaimed offender. That gives it the power of this section gives power to the magistrate to go against the person and take the help of the police department. The police can send that, then police can search for that person. Like in local district courts, there are a number of cases where a person is refusing to accept the court summons. When the proclamation is done through the police, either he comes and takes surrenders before the court, or he is proclaimed as a proclaimed offender. See, if a trader is proceeded against a proclaimed offender and a tag is attached against his name, he suffers financial difficulties also. So it is advisable and is prudent for him to attend the court as early as possible, because when a person is blacklisted or is declared a proclaimed offender, his credit scores also suffers. Like if a trader who had taken a loan from the bank and his credit score, what we call as CIBIL and other day-to-day transaction, he is suffering if he is declared a person. So it damages him economically, and also socially there are problems which he can face with it. So this acts provide ample safeguards to the complainant if a person is shunning his responsibilities or is not coming or honoring the court summons. I hope I'm clear with it. Then there's a query that about new sections put in Negotiable Instruments Act. New section, by way of new section, I would assume that we are talking about section 143A and section 148, which has been incorporated in the year 2018. So there are also a number of queries after that. I'll take this question jointly. Then I'll come to the foreign instruments. What is a foreign instrument? Foreign instrument, for that, I'll just read a bare provision of it. What are foreign instruments? Section 12 of the Act defines a foreign instrument, but before reading foreign instrument, I'll read section 11, that is inland instrument. What is an inland instrument? A promissory note, bill of exchange, or check drawn or made in India and made payable in or drawn upon any person resident in India shall be deemed to be an inland instrument. So see this inland instrument, that the promissory notes or checks which are issued in India, payable in India, and enforceable in India are called inland instruments. This could be drafts, checks, and other promissory notes. Similarly, the opposite of it is a foreign instrument, that such instrument not so drawn, made or made payable in India shall be deemed to be a foreign instrument. I hope it is simply defined to you, but see, I'll tell you a practical aspect with a case law. I'll cite you that. This is a citation case law which I'm citing. Pale Horse Designs and Another versus Natarajan Ratnam. This is a Madras High Court judgment given by Justice P.R. Shivakumar. And this is cited in, I'll give you a citation. What I'll read is what a person here had to face when a court was brought to this notice. Designer of checks issued in a foreign country, territorial jurisdiction to file complaint. Business transactions took place between the accused and complainant in USA. Checks were drawn in USA and made payable in USA. Complainant, who was an NRI, came to India and presented checks to a bank at Chennai for collection. Dishonor of check. Notice demanding payment issued to accused person from Chennai. Complaint filed in Chennai court. Complaint dismissed. It was held Chennai court had no jurisdiction to entertain the complaint since the offence was not committed within the jurisdiction of the said metropolitan magistrate. None of the accused was citizen of India. A person who is not a citizen of India for an act committed in a foreign country wherein it is not a punishable offence cannot be prosecuted in India. See, another point which was held here is check drawn, made in foreign country on a drawee bank functioning in the foreign country and made payable therein shall be a foreign instrument, and the law of the country wherein the check was drawn or made payable shall be the law governing the rights and liabilities of the parties and the dishonor of the check. As such, the payee cannot select the country and present it through a bank therein for the collection to confer jurisdiction on a court functioning therein. Simply putting it, it is just that a foreign issued check that is payable in the foreign country only will not be acceptable here in India. But there can be a number of judgments where a foreign issued check that is payable in India is accepted. Again, that is drawn on the person to it is drawn to. I'll then move over to this. I'll mention this citation afterwards in the end of the lecture. I'll pass it on to this judgment. And the next is views on current protests going on against the proposed move to decriminalize offense of dishonor of check under section 138 of negotiable instrument. See, the current situation which our country is passing through, even the whole world that is passing through, is very dangerous and economically very damaging to all the countries, and which have a cascading effect on the social, economic, and political spectrum of the society. See, if there is no money, then this period gives rise to a lot of disharmony, and this becomes dangerous for a society where there is no money. There will be a chance of a lot of anarchy and chaos which can spread to the society. And to make business that is very difficult now to run. See, the maximum business taking place nowadays is through credit. Not now, like from the past decade, that it is a credit-based economy, which we are seeing in our day-to-day lives. What if this section 138 is decriminalized? What are the consequences or the negative impact or positive impacts made if we decriminalize this section in the interest of the business sense? See, if a business that is being run on credit, a simple security that is needed to a lender of money is, what do you say, paramount upon him, the person, to have his interest safeguarded. If simply we say that his interest can be safeguarded through a civil law. See, in a civil law, what is his mode of recovery? A mode of recovery is first for him to pay a court fees. A court fees that is by way of stamps, a court stamp act, which would again put a burden on him. And again, after paying the court stamp duty, if an amount is 50 lakhs, he has to pay a certain amount of stamp duty to the court. He will again be paying it through his own pocket. Then again he has to lead an evidence, and in the civil procedure it is very lengthy, and this has no deterrent effect on the person against whom he has lent his money or let his money. This, see, in a way it will affect the market transaction or the trust or the security that a person has in his mind. What a blank check or a promissory note which he keeps with himself. If decriminalizing it, it will be a deterrent effect. See, simply speaking on the term of we as a lawyer community, we are an educated a lot. A few certain duties and expectations are expected from us. We are the enlightened members of the society because we have studied law, we know the nitty-gritties and we the details of the law. It is our responsibility to inform the society and the person in general that which law the government wants to set aside or to bring a new law which is deterrent to the society at a large. Sometimes it becomes our duty to look further from the four confines of a courtroom because we are a responsible person of the society. In a business community, the only source which we face, like in a rural economy, in Punjab, it is a rural economy. Most of the transaction or a person is through his artiya, business mandis, or the trading community. The farmer takes his money or borrows money from a artiya, a businessman or a wholesaler lends him goods to a trader from a small community or a place, district, mahalla, whatever you can say that, by giving him a security of a blank check. So if it is decriminalized, what remedy does a person has other than seeing his money squandered in this way, to where he has no criminal uh, law to help him get his money back? See, if in already the Indian law is burdened by millions of cases, this will only add to the burden of the court. This will only lengthen the procedure, which will be again a detriment to our legal system. This legal system should be pragmatic, and justice delivered should be faster, which this act is already taking well care of. It is, as it is a summary procedure, criminal procedure, and it is followed, and the cases are expected to be expedited in a time bound manner, which they are, generally they are, but sometimes when the burden is so much on the courts, sometimes they slip into 1 or 2 years. Generally, a check bounce case here in Patiala, I can say, is decided between 1 year and 2 years. Whereas a civil litigation, we know that it will take a number of years for a person to get a benefit from it. A few uh, observations which I have also gone through research, which have also said that the proposed decriminalization will cause enormous suffering, hardship on investors, traders, and businessmen at large, who would lose hope in the judicial and democratic system, and which will eventually encourage them to resort to old modes of recovery. What are the old modes of recovery? Then it will be a muscle man being employed by the traders. What will this do? This will again harm our social fabric. Who would want gunda elements to come to your house to recover when there is a act which is totally capable enough to help you? This will encourage law and order problem. This will encourage gunda elements. They will organize into an organized mafia, and they will disturb the social fabric. There will be a lot of physical violence in it, and also economic loss related to it. So it is strongly advisable. This is my opinion, that this act is, as of now, it is serving our judicial system well. A few amendments can be brought in, like section 143A and 148, which we will discuss further. They have been brought in with the change in circumstances of the time, which can be discussed. But but to generally do away with this criminality will be a detriment to our society and to our business community as a whole. Like I've already talked to, that when even if a civil remedy is followed, a civil decree, we know how to get an civil decree executed. Number of generation passes to get an decree executed. So this is a very cumbersome process. Execution of, like what I've researched, and I'll share it with you. Execution of the judgment order after taking it is, its very essence of criminality, will be extremely time consuming, tedious, complicated, and a rather impossible task in absence of fear of any deterrent punishment as contemplated under this act. The execution of the judgment order will also necessarily involve separate proceeding, which will lead to multiplicity of a litigation, increase in burden on the existing system, costly and time consuming affair. See, a litigation coming to a lawyer is a good thing. It is it is a one way you can say a lawyer can have a number of, it will increase the litigation or cases, but on a whole it will be a deterrent or a bad impact on the society, which we as lawyers should rise above our small thinking, that a number of cases will come, but when there's no capacity to pay, no case to fight, it will be only adding to the burden of the court. So coming forward, I will again see the next question. I'll take the next question. Negotiable Instrument Act in view of banking. Negotiable Instrument Act in view of banking, what I can say is that see that now that the role of checks are decreasing, but not in the small cities like in Patiala or Sangrur or areas within. In big metropolitan cities, the use of RTGS transaction and demand drafts are increasing. The banking has been made simpler, like uh, it is more easy through app-based channels and through a number of UPIs like Paytm, Google Pay, and other systems that are coming in rapidly in our systems. So the banking has been brought into our smartphones. So it is getting easier and easier for the banking to be done, and there's also less chance of any forgery. But again, with the new systems come new challenges. That is cyber fraud, which we have to guard against, and also the banks have to take care of the security and the data which is being punched into the system regularly. Like each one of us are registered by our emails into the Android and all these iPhone systems, and the banks also rely on our emails. But once they are also hacked, then there's a big chance of uh, defraud and damage which we can face. Negotiable Instrument Act is a past system which is catching up with our present system, but in a future, this act also has to be brought up with the changing times. The banking system, as it is an evolving system, the RBI is working on it, but it has to be balanced with a number of ways. Like there are a lot of online security systems available, but there's always a scope of fraud which we have to guard against. The other question, which is explanation of section 34. I'll read a bare provision of section 34, then I'll explain you with it with a case law, one case law. Section 34, which states acceptance by several drawees, not partners, wherein there are several drawees of a bill of exchange who are not partners. Each of them can accept it for himself, but none of them can accept it for another without his authority. See, this is the bare reading of it. I'll tell you that in a partnership firm, see, there are a number of partners. See, in a partnership firm, see, if there are 4 partners and one partner is running it, and the books of accounts are being maintained by one partner, and all the transactions and which is being done by the one person who is the partner. Any misstep or any wrong step or the litigation which is done by one partner or will also have effect on the other partners. So this is a collective responsibility, which we can say is a vicarious responsibility. But what is the safeguard of this section? This section provides safeguards to a person who is not a partner. See, if a munim of a firm, he's not a partner, he's just maintaining the books or is being designated work by the partners. He will not be made liable or made party to a complaint preferred by a complainant against that person until and unless there is specific allegations against that person. See, the partners are jointly and severally liable. But if an employee of it, that is explained in the section 34, he will not be liable in this act until and unless there is specifically provided or mentioned in the complaint. See, if complaint is mentioned, complaint is filed, initially the complainant has to mention the specific allegations against that person. If you do not mention specific allegation against that person, then that person will not be prosecuted. This is separate from the partners. I'll read you a judgment which I got it from the law finder. This is Honorable Apex Court 2009, Volume 10, SCC, page 48. KK Ahuja versus VK Arora. Dishonor of check, offense by company, vicarious liability of persons of the company when arises. Essential averments in complaint, requirement persons of officers who were in charge of and also responsible for the conduct of business of the company are vicariously liable for offences of company. Hence, no specific averment in complaint as to role of each is required. Duly affirmed sworn statement to the effect may be sufficient. However, complaint against person, officers who were either not responsible for conduct of business of the company or were not in charge of the company should be specific as to their position, duties, and role in the issue of said dishonored check, disclosing consent, connivance, or negligence. See, if a complainant brings complaint against all the employees and partners, then this purpose of this act is defeated. If a person who is not intimately known to the day-to-day running of the company, how can he be made liable against this act? So this section gives a safeguard against misuse of this uh, act against that person. I will write down the citations which I mention in this comment section when we end this session. So coming to the next part. How can the insertion of section 148 affect the implementation of the Negotiable Instrument Act? So see, now we are coming to the last part. So I'll take 2-3 questions at the one single time. I'll read out again. How can the insertion of section 148 affect the implementation of Negotiable Instrument Act? And another question, do the courts have the power to issue a warrant of attachment and sale of property in relation to payment of interim compensation? Is section 143A of the Negotiable Instrument Act retrospective? Now coming to the first part, the second question about the new section put in Negotiable Instrument Act. This will cover all things which I am now going to share with you. This is also the most important and the latest amendment that has been brought in. See, I'll start with the new amendment brought in 2018, which introduced new sections to this Negotiable Instrument Act. Section 143A. I'll read out a general section. Section 143A, subclause 1. Notwithstanding anything contained in the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, the court trying an offence under section 138 may order the drawer of the check to pay interim compensation to the complainant. This is very important. This was never done before. I'll again read it. Order the drawer of the check to pay interim compensation to the complainant. Subclause A. In a summary trial or a summons case where he pleads not guilty to the accusation made in the complaint and in any other case upon framing of charge. Subclause 2. The interim compensation under section 1 shall not exceed 20% of the amount of the check. See, I'll simplify it to you. As offences under this Negotiable Instrument Act are summary trials. A summary trial or a summons case where he pleads not guilty to the accusation made. See, if a person is summoned, he is duty bound to present himself before the court. At the time of the bail, charges are framed against him. But when an interim evidence is led against him, at the time of section 313 CRPC, where he pleads not guilty and is ready and willing to contest this case, then this section 143A, gives a right to the complainant to ask upon the magistrate for an amount of money not exceeding 20%. See, if a check amount is of 1 lakh, the complainant can ask the court that the accused be directed to pay to him 20% of that amount or not more than 20%. It is discretion of the magistrate whether he wants to order him to pay 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, but not exceeding 20% of the case. So this is a discretion which is passed on to the magistrate. He will see the circumstances, what is the best compensation or the amount to be deposited by the accused person. Then I come to the subclause 143, the 3. The interim compensation shall be paid within 60 days from the date of the order under subsection 1, or within such further period not exceeding 30 days as may be directed by the court, or sufficient cause being shown by the drawer of the check. This is the period provided, that how much from the date of order, in which period he has to deposit this amount to the court. And now what is the remedy if he do not deposit it? This is covered here. If the drawer of the check is acquitted, the court shall direct the complainant to repay to the drawer the amount of interim compensation. See, this also covers if the person is acquitted, he has to pay back that amount along with interest prevalent at that time. The subclause 5, which says that interim compensation payable under this section may be recovered as if it was a fine under section 421 of the Code of Criminal Procedure Code. The amount of fine imposed under section 138 or the amount of compensation awarded under section 357 of the Code of Criminal Procedure shall be reduced by the amount paid or recovered as interim compensation under this section. I've been also asked, what is the procedure? What if a person does not pay this amount? See, this is the, I'll come to it after I cover the section 148. 143A is being done. I'll explain you after 148A. This 143A comes in effect at the time of trial stage. Remember, when a trial is going on. Section 148 comes at the time of appeal. If the accused person is convicted, when he prefers an appeal before the higher court, that is the Additional Sessions Court, what this remedy, section 148, provides the complainant another right, that he can, when he appears before this court, he can ask the judge to direct the complainant to pay him the amount of compensation, that is, or the fine, that is not more than 20%, as explained earlier. I'll just read out you the bare provision. The appellate court may order the appellant to deposit such amount which shall be minimum of 20%. I think there was a problem. Am I audible? Is my voice clear? I think there was a time gap. Okay. I'll carry on with it. Just few minutes. I won't take your time. Provided that the amount payable under this subsection shall be in addition to any interim compensation paid by the appellant under section 143A. See, this section is enabling section, which a person has already paid. If a person has already paid compensation at the trial court in section 143, in section 148 at the appeal stage, the court can still direct him to pay further compensation not exceeding 20%. It is a a safeguard against misuse of the process of law, where a person has preferred an appeal. The amount referred in subsection 10 shall be deposited within 60 days. That is the same procedure that is being told in 143. The appellant court may direct the release of the amount deposited by the appellant at the time, any time during the pendency, provided that if the appellant is acquitted, the court shall direct the complainant to repay the amount. That is also explained to you earlier, that he has to pay it with the amount along with up-to-date interest prevalent at that time. Now, the specific question that was, what is the remedy when a person refuses to pay that? This this new amendment itself provides in it that the magistrate can follow the procedure prescribed in section 421 of Code of Criminal Procedure. Section 421 of the Criminal Procedure, I'll explain it in simple language. The section provides two modes of realization of the amount of fine when a sentence of fine is imposed by the court by way of punishment. First, the court may issue a warrant for the levy of amount of a fine by ordering attachment of the movable property of the accused person. Obviously, this does not include actionable claims, debts, undivided share in joint property, that is future salary not being tangible, corporeal property is not attachable. See this section 421 of the code. What is this? This is an enabling section. What does this provide to you? This provides the magistrate a power to attach the property, but the court does not attach it directly. It passes an order to be followed by the concerned area district magistrate, that could be a DC, Tehsildar, or an SDM, whosoever is to be approached with. He can just give them the direction that a property of that accused person be attached to the court, which can be resold further to get the amount deposited. The second mode of recovery, as explained in this section, is issuing of warrant to the district collector authorizing him to realize the amount of fine as arrears of land revenue from the movable or immovable property of both of the default. The judicial magistrate does not have power to order sale of property of the offender under this section. Instead, he should use a warrant to the collector of the district to realize the amount as arrears of land revenue. Subsection 1 contemplates that in general an offender ought not to be required both to pay fine and to serve the sentence in default. So these are the details which are not required, but my point is here is that the court cannot itself take the power of the executive to sell the property. See, the land, the movable or the immovable property is registered with the magistrate or the revenue department. The magistrate can only direct or empower him through his order to attach his property or to sell his property. These powers are not directly exercised by the magistrate. These are exercised on the empowerment of the court by the concerned district magistrate or the revenue authorities of that person. So now coming to the specific question, that whether section 143A is retrospective and section 148, there is a lot of, when this act came through, there was a lot of confusion whether this act is retrospective or prospective. Generally speaking, whenever a new law is introduced, it is not retrospective, it is prospective. Prospective means it will come into act on the date of notification. If a similar offense that was not punishable in the earlier times will not become punishable when this act is passed, it will only become punishable when on that date on which that law is notified. But in this regard, section 143A has been ruled by a number of high courts and as well as Supreme Court not to be a retrospective section, because specifically speaking, if we generally read the terms as notified in the act, it is not a retrospective act because it is an appeal of the trial court. See, if a accused has been convicted of section 138 and when this act was have to pay the amount of 20% or less, whatever was that, he had to. But when an appeal is preferred, when section 148 is already enforced, when it has come into effect, the accused person can be brought to deposit the amount of compensation as directed by the court. This issue was raised in the number of high courts. I will just read out you one or two judgment, not to take too much of your time, to make it simpler, and I quote it to you. First of all, I'll come to section, what do you say? Section 143A. Section 143A of the amended act empowers any court while trying an offense of dishonor of check to direct the drawer, who is the issuer of the check, to pay interim compensation to the complainant. The amount of compensation payable cannot exceed 20% of the amount stated. The amount has to be paid within stipulated period. So I'll just take up section 148 in the Supreme Court case, that is in the case of Surinder Singh Deswal, alias Colonel S.S. Deswal versus Varinder Gandhi, quoted in the Law Journal 2019, Volume 3, RCR Criminal, page 186, passed by Honorable Mr. Justice M.R. Shah and Justice A.S. Bopanna. What have the courts have held? The complaint was filed against the appellants, herein originally accused, for the offence committed under section 138 Act prior to 2nd of September 2018. Here I want to point out that when the date of this codification of this act is 1st of September 2018, any fresh case that is filed after 1st of September 2018 will directly fall under section 143A and 148. While section 148 can be enforced in the appeals that were the trials already conducted before 2018, that the appeals that are still pending, the person can prefer and use this section 148 to get the compensation. The date is to be remembered, that is 1st of September 2018, that if you read the bare provision or if you go online and take the printout of the amendments introduced, you will see that date. But in the official gazette that is introduced, that was in the August month, but the act came into force on 1st of September 2018. So we will go by the new bare acts, where that date is specified as 1st of September 2018. I'll just rush through. I think the time is also running. I don't know how much time I'm taking your extra. The opening word of the amendment section 48 is that notwithstanding anything contained in the Code of Criminal Procedure thereafter, irrespective of the provisions of section 357(2) Code of Criminal, pending appeal before the first appellate court, challenging the order of conviction, the sentence under section 138 of NIA, the appellate court is conferred with the power to direct the appellate to deposit such sum pending appeal, which shall be minimum of 20% of the fine or compensation awarded by the trial court. Further, question was also raised regarding the usage of word may in section 148. As your teachers must have taught you the difference between may presume and shall presume, I'll just go by it. Section 148 of Amendment Act, the Supreme Court on this contention was of the view that considering the amendment, that the amended section 148 as a whole to be read with the statement of objects and reasons of the amending section 148 of NIA. Though it is true that in amended section 148 of the NIA, the word used is may, it is generally to be construed as a rule or shall, and not to direct to deposit by the appellate court as an exception for which special reasons are to be assigned. The Supreme Court has accordingly dismissed the appeal and paid the compensation under section 148A, as his appeal is of the earlier period before September 2018. But this judgment was, his writ was dismissed, and he had to contend with it. Similarly, I'll quote you the judgment of our own High Court, that is Punjab and Haryana High Court. What did Justice Rajbir Shehrawat held? What did he said about section 143A, whether it is retrospective or prospective, it will become clear in it. Since the amended provision provides, sorry, I did not mention you the judgment. It is Guinea Garments versus and others versus Sethi Garments and others. It is quoted in 2019, subclause 2019, volume 2, RCR criminal, page 833, delivered by Justice Rajbir Sehrawat. Since the amended provision provides for enforcement of recovery of the interim compensation by way of cursive procedure, it is nothing but an obligation imposed upon the accused. Section 3 of the Specific Relief Act has clarified the meaning of the term obligation by defining that any duty enforceable under law is an obligation as per General Clauses Act. This definition has to be read in all central acts unless defined otherwise in the relevant act. Such an obligation having consequences qua the property rights of the accused cannot be treated as substantive provision affecting his substantive right by casting a substantive obligation upon him to make the payment of money, and if not paid, making him subject to legal deprivation, disability qua his properties. Therefore, it is to be held section 143 of the Act cast substantive obligation upon the accused and thereby affect the substantive right of the accused. Since the Amendment Act has not made the provision applicable retrospectively, specifically to pending cases, hence cannot be applied retrospectively to pending cases which arose from the default of the accused, which has taken place before coming into force of this provision. The High Court was of the view that Section 143 of the Amendment Act is not shown to be a step in furtherance to the procedure of the trial, authorizing the trial court to pass any order having consequence against the accused qua the steps of the trial in case of non-payment of interim compensation. See, now this question of Section 143 is more or less settled since we are in the year 2002. Any case that is being filed in any case will be governed by Section 143A and Section 148A. But initially, this led to a lot of confusion. A lot of lawyers of the complaint, some delay in the trial, which was finally settled by this judgments. Also, a little head note which I'll read by the Supreme Court on this Section 143A only. This was held by the Honorable Justice UU Lalit and Justice Vineet Saran. Applicability of Section 143A. This was held in GJ Raja versus Taj Raja Surana. Section 143A of Negotiable Instrument Act. Section 421 of the provision to direct interim compensation applicability. Prior to insertion of the provision, there was no provision in statute book whereunder even before pronouncement of the guilt of accused could be made to pay or deposit interim compensation. Imposition of consequential recovery of fine or compensation could arise only after person was found guilty of offense. That was status of law which was sought to be changed. Applicability of provision prospective in nature, confined to cases where offense were committed after introduction of provision in order to force accused to pay such interim compensation. Appeal was allowed. So generally on these issues, my general take on this is that section, the amendments that have been introduced in this negotiation, it is providing the safeguards to both the complainant as well as the accused. Even, see, we are living in a society where misuse is naturally going to be there. People have to have a safeguard provided into this act. If a person is innocent, he can come out of this law. But if being of implicating an innocent, a powerful person will misuse it against an person who has no power to defend himself. A check can be misused by any person at any time. It is a security check which he can have. He can fill it up himself and present it to the banker and get it bounced. But there are number of safeguards. Like in the trial stage, a person has to prove his capacity, and the person can call for the income tax returns or the ledger book also of the person to be called, where he can be asked to show his capacity or the money capacity to deal with such an amount. This act provides a number of safeguards in it. My only uh, point here is that this act has served our Indian judicial system well as of now, and the number of small merchants, traders, which are doing their day-to-day business, are doing under this act only. This act is uh, today prevalent and will serve its purpose well. Not taking your much time, it is already 1 o'clock. I would like to thank each and every one of you who patiently listened to me, and also like to thank the organizers, the teachers who have been part of your teaching curriculum. They must have taught you the bare provisions, but when one comes out of the uh, college or the law department, the reality is totally different. When here practical work matters more, but at the same time is always a plus point. Slowly and gradually, a new graduate will understand the nitty gritties of law. It is not everything in black and white. A person can come and do uh, good a job, and with this be a part of your further webinar section, which will you can call me or make me a part of it. I will be more than willing to help you. I hope whatever effort I have done, or I could find some time from my schedule. I did my practical research. I kept this lecture as practical as possible because I know that bare provisions can be read over, but in the court of law, judgments matter, the precedent matters, and I've tried to come out with the latest judgments, which I will put it up later, or I'll coordinator who will on this webinar for your future reference. And I thank you very much, and a special thanks to Dr. Sanjeev Mehta sir, who have done a wonderful job, and I thank you, and I thank him from the core of my heart.